Alright, so picking up where we left off, this is part 2 of the CS-1 build video. First thing we want to do is finish attaching that rear set bracket that we were attaching before. So, actually we're going to come in on a different area. We're going to skip around a little bit. So here's the key switch plate that is the original key switch that mounts to the new plate we give you. This is the powder-coated plate that we give you that fills the original speedo gap in the tank. The 3 lights we give you there are threaded on the bottom. They're 2 in the outside, 1 in the middle. We use the middle one. We use the neutral light. The outside we keep as turn signals. And the key switch will be actually mounted to that other hole. Now here, if you see on the original speedo, we take out the light assembly and the cable right here. There's the 3 lights that's there. You might want to mark down before you totally disassemble this. Mark down what each light was. Like here, maybe is the left turn signal. Here's the right turn signal, so that you can choose what you want to use in your tank plate. We choose the neutral light and the left and right turn signals typically, and then we just take the bulbs out of the rest of them. One of them I think is headlight brights, and one of them is something else. Anyway, so disassemble those, take the lights, once you've marked what they are, take them out. Use this white piece here. We're going to have to shave down one of these little tabs on the side. Make sure it's the opposite to the part you're using right here. This is the side you shave down. The other side attaches to the kit itself. You want to shave that down so you'll see in a minute here how it fits in. Okay, so the original lights left and right and this bright switch, you're going to take the rubber gasket off, take out the small plastic pieces, and you can get rid of those. We're going to use the rubber gasket as like a barrier between the tank plate that we include and the thing. So set that rubber gasket around the 3 clear lenses we include with the kit, and attach the light assembly here. There's a nut threaded on the bottom of the rod that you want to thread on, and then a nut on top. That basically sandwiches the original plastic piece in place. Here's a second nut. It might be a little bit crooked, but if you do this just right, it'll hold it in place. Here's another shot of me putting the first nut down. So that you thread that down, and then you thread the second one on top of it, basically sandwiching the 3-piece light assembly against that rubber gasket. You know, reasonably tight. It doesn't have to be too tight. If for some reason it's not sitting completely flat, you can put a 3rd nut on the other rod with a big washer on the rod on the right to hold the right side down. But typically, if you do it right, the left side is all you'll need to hold that in place. Same thing with the key switch. You're going to thread a nut down on the threaded rod, and you're going to put the key switch in place. If the key switch doesn't quite fit in the circle there, you can use some sandpaper and open up the powder coating a little bit. It's a very tight fit, and that's on purpose to make a watertight seal. So that key switch fits up in, and then a second nut will be sandwiching the key switch in place, as shown right here. It's a pretty simple assembly. The video kind of speaks for itself, how it goes in place. Lights up top, key switch on the bottom. And there's how it'll look finished. And there's a shot from underneath. Okay, and here's the actual connector for the key switch. We're going to have to extend that. We're going to cut it and extend it. Now you're going to want to cut this. You can either do it at the key switch itself, or you can do it on the bike end. So here's some footage of extending the key switch. So here's the original. On the newer models, it's 5 wires you need to extend. On the older bikes, the 86 through 88s, it's actually only 4 wires. So you just need basic soldering skills and maybe some heat shrink, and you want to extend this. We extended this one 28 inches. You don't necessarily have to extend it 28 inches. I think on my last bike I extended it about 24 inches and it was fine. You're going to cut these wires. You can either choose, like I said, to extend this key switch wiring harness here at the bike wiring harness or off the key switch itself. If it makes it less confusing for you, extend it off the key switch itself. It really doesn't matter which way you choose. You just need to extend it about 20 inches, 24 inches. So we recommend getting some wire colors that are similar to the wires used on the bike. Soldering this, we used 16 gauge wire. It works fine. You could use 16 and 14, but 16 gauge works fine. Even 18 gauge is probably okay. We use some heat shrink to heat shrink after we solder each connection. We heat shrink and solder it, or solder and heat shrink it, so that everything looks clean. Once you've heat shrinked all your connections and extended that key switch 20 to 24 inches, you're all set. That's pretty much only wiring, custom wiring you're going to have to do on the CS-1 besides putting on the tail light, and that's a very, very, very simple process. Once you've extended the key switch, what we're going to do here is attach the original negative battery ground to a new ground. So we took a little sandpaper and cleaned up this little spot from where the original battery box mounted, and that's going to be our new ground. You can either use this spot or use a new engine bolt, one of the bolts on the engine. Either one will work. I like to use this battery box location because it looks cleaner, and you can attach the original ground with either an Allen head screw or one of the original battery box screws will work fine. And you attach that there. Here, take some double-sided tape, 3M double-sided tape. You're going to attach the CDI box to the side of the battery box. Now, the battery box, of course, is on the bike already because you saw the battery box fitment in the other video. That's basically the same thing as fitment here. This is the exact same process. So the side of the battery box on the left-hand side, note that the wiring plug will be facing backwards, and that'll be stuck to the side of the battery box here. Now, the original rectifier wires facing up will fit on the front of the battery box. Use the original hardware here. There's two bolts, and I think we include 2 lock nuts for this. The original 2 bolts will work on this. And then you thread it from the back with the lock nuts. So the CDI on the left there with the wiring facing backwards is stuck to the battery box, and then the rectifier here is on the front with the original hardware and new lock nuts that we include. And then underneath, as you see, the starter solenoid fits on the bottom. Make sure you fit the starter solenoid, and then you probably wouldn't have disconnected this already, but if you disconnected it, put the starter wire back up from the starter solenoid. Once that's wired, you can put the rubber boot over that. Next, we got the carburetor in place. We're going to be putting the K&N air filter in place. Make sure you use your K&N air filter oil. We have a can of it here, but you can use the oil that comes with it. Make sure you saturate the air filter with the oil before you put it in place. Put the air filter on the carburetor. Now, we have another video showing carb jetting. Make sure you, then here's the throttle cable. This is the throttle linkage that's going to attach to the carburetor. Pretty self-explanatory, but we figured we'd cover it. This is the same as it would be on an original Savage with the linkage in place. The newer models come with a little clip that holds it in place. Air filter gets clamped to the carburetor with the original, with the strap that comes with the battery, with the strap that comes with it. Now here the shifter linkage has got to be flipped around backwards. Be very careful. If you need to get it off, you can use a flathead screwdriver. Now you're going to flip it around backwards so that the linkage is on the outside, and you're going to face that basically straight down so that the linkage is basically pointing straight down. Make sure it's in the right place. Put the bolt back in and tighten it up. We're going to reuse that rubber shifter threaded rod. Now we include custom rear sets here with the kit. So here's your rear set assembly basically assembled. There's a bolt, a threaded collar, rear set, and the lever, and then the shifter sleeve here with a small pin that adjusts your angles, and then there's a threaded collar. So there's the pin. That basically is the pin that's going to help you adjust the angle on the rear sets. Here's the pin once again. It can go in any of those holes. Now there's a reason there's 7 holes on one of the parts and 6 on the other, so you can basically get an infinite adjustability. Here on the peg right there, you'll see that little cutout. That's where the pin goes, and now that can be spun around to any position, so these rear sets have infinite adjustability. So once your rear set, now we're going to show you in a minute where you're going to place the rear sets and how you're going to mount them, but for here we're just showing the assembly. There's the linkage assembly and then the threaded collar that goes on. And to tighten this, you want to use like an air tool wrench. There's like a 2-prong wrench that typically is found amongst air tools. You can find them at Home Depot for a few dollars. you can tighten up that collar. I'll show you later what I'm talking about. The front of the rear set is going to have the knob, the knurled front toe assembly, and on the back side is tightened up with the Allen screw that's included. So these rear sets will come out disassembled and you'll put them together. And now one side of the rear set we have the standard bolt, and on the other side you'll notice the bolt is 10 millimeters longer, and we're going to show you why that is. That is on purpose. So, and then the nut goes on the end, the lock nut, and the sleeve goes on the inside. There's the sleeve on the inside. And if you want to tighten down this threaded collar here, those two prongs, you can use a standard air tool wrench, as I'm showing here, an adjustable air tool wrench. You can find these at Home Depot for $5, and that will be used to tighten down that collar, threaded collar to tighten down. Once you've got the correct position, use this to tighten the rear set together. Here's the linkage that we're going to be doing the brake side of the rear set first. The linkage we include, the C-clips, goes on the back side, so there's a clevis pin. Here's the threaded stainless rod and a jam nut. So put the jam nut on your shifter linkage first, then thread it into the collar on the rear set. That threads in, the jam nut goes down. Thread that almost all the way in. Now thread the other end to the shifter linkage itself. And here's the same jam nut and clevis that we were showing before. Here's the rear set assembly with the Allen head, the sleeve, and then the Allen head bolt. The nut goes on the back side. Tighten that up. Be very careful while you're doing this. Tighten this up. We're just being careful here so we don't scratch the powder-coated rear set brackets. Use an Allen wrench on the front and a wrench on the back and tighten up the rear sets. Attach your linkage. And, of course, there's adjustability here. And you can change the angle of your rear set foot pegs depending on your taste. And on that, put the pin through, and on the back you attach the C-clip, and there you go. There's your shifter side. Now we're going to be showing you how to do the opposite side, the brake linkage. So first step is to put the jam nut on like we did before on the long end, and then the other side we got the clevis pin and the attached assembly. So here's the rear set bracket. You're going to put the rear set on, tighten it as we did on the other side, on the brake side. Tighten it down. Don't tighten it too much. You want to make sure there's a little bit of slack here. You tighten it too much, it won't pivot. Once it moves, put the assembly through. There's a pin, and then the C-clip goes on the back side. Now, it's very important. This is a kind of a tricky process. Here's the rear brake, the spring that gives you a rebound on the rear drum assembly. Now, the whole trick here is to have plenty of tension on the brake itself before you attach the rod assembly to this. Otherwise, you won't have any rear brakes. And what I mean by that is the key word here is pre-tension. You want to pre-tension the rear brake as much as possible, and as you can see, we open the spring up to make that possible. So we want to basically tension the brake with a lot of tension before we attach the rear set linkage. I mean the brake linkage. When the brake linkage comes back, you want that right there, the linkage coming off your drum, the pivot arm coming off your drum. You want that to be almost fully braked, fully compressed on the brake shoes before you attach the rear brackets, the linkage to the rear brake assembly. So if it's done correctly, when you attach this linkage to the rear assembly, the brake will almost be fully engaged right before your rear set is basically pushed down. You want to basically get rid of all the slack in it. You don't want any slack. So once you get the linkage assembled correctly and the slack is done, you can adjust your rear sets. Now here's what I was talking about earlier about adjustability. If you find the right angle, you'll see that this has 7 holes and the other part has 6 holes. That little notch right there is where the pin will drop down into. So what you do is stick the thread knurled end up, find the angle you want. Once you find the angle you like, you look at where any holes line up and drop the pin into that hole. So you line up those things, then you turn your threaded knurled rod until that hole lines up together. Find your angle and pick which one works for you, and then you can drop the pin into any one of those holes.